All right, let's dive right into this explainer. When we picture Antarctica down at the southernmost tip of our planet, it's super easy to just imagine this static, desolate, frozen wasteland. But beneath the surface and across those massive ice sheets, we're actually looking at an intense, dynamic battle for life playing out every single day. It's not just a geography lesson. It is literally the ultimate high-stakes survival thriller. To really grasp the stakes here, just think about this number, 65 days. That is exactly how long a male emperor penguin stands completely still in pitch black, -60-degree weather. And get this, without a single meal. Why? To protect one single egg. He keeps it perfectly balanced on his feet, tucked under this warm little fold of belly skin, while the female swims hundreds of kilometers just to find food. It's absolutely mind-blowing and easily one of the most astonishing displays of parental dedication anywhere on Earth. Now, that kind of unbelievable dedication definitely didn't just happen overnight. We're talking about the result of a 50-million-year evolutionary arms race. If you trace them all the way back to the Eocene epoch, emperor penguins actually descended from ancient birds that thrived in lush, temperate forests. Yeah, Antarctica wasn't always a giant freezer. But as the Earth cooled and those massive ice sheets formed around 23 million years ago, their ancestors had to either adapt or die. So they evolved these larger, super dense bodies specifically built to trap heat, transforming into the ultimate survivors of a punishing new world. Which brings us to their winter reality today. Imagine just trying to stand upright in winds whipping across the ice at 200 kilometers per hour. In those kinds of extremes, every single ounce of fat, every drop of energy is perfectly calculated. That tiny fold of belly skin we mentioned, it is quite literally the only thing standing between the next generation of their species and the frozen abyss. But here's where the story takes a really terrifying turn. A 2024 study reveals that our protagonist's greatest threat isn't actually the cold anymore, it's the heat. A staggering 65% of emperor penguin colonies are at risk of disappearing entirely by the year 2050. The sea ice they rely on as their frozen foundation for breeding is just shrinking. And when that ice melts early, it breaks apart way before the chicks have even developed their waterproof feathers. As you can imagine, that severely impacts their chances of surviving. And this melting ice, it sets off a massive chain reaction that ripples right down to the very base of the Antarctic food web. Think of it like an engine. It starts with the summer sun, triggering a huge bloom of marine algae. That algae feeds the Antarctic krill, these tiny crustaceans that swarm by the millions. And those krill are the irreplaceable fuel for the whole ecosystem, sustaining everything from the penguins to the seals, all the way up to the most massive whales on the planet. So the crucial takeaway here is that warming oceans directly threaten the estimated 500 million tons of krill, fueling every giant roaming these frigid waters. The British Antarctic Survey just put out a warning confirming that early sea ice loss is driving a really sharp decline in krill populations. And when the very foundation of your food web starts to crumble, well, every predator above it has to drastically alter how they survive. Which leads us perfectly into our next section, apex hunters and the predator paradigm. So as that food supply shifts around and gets wildly unpredictable, we're seeing apex hunters adapt their deadly strategies. Take the leopard seal, for example. This thing is a solitary phantom, patrolling the dark waters at roughly 40 kilometers an hour. We're talking about a massive 600-kilogram predator with a jaw that opens a terrifying 160 degrees. They basically just lurk silently beneath the ice floes, waiting to unleash a razor-sharp ambush on any unsuspecting penguin dropping into the water. But fascinatingly, they're also super opportunistic. If penguins are scarce, they actually have specialized teeth that let them filter feed on krill instead. Then, of course, there are the undisputed rulers of Antarctica, the orcas. And man, these guys are a stark contrast to the solitary seal. Weighing over 6 tons, orcas are incredibly intelligent and live in these highly organized social pods. They use really intricate languages, complete with distinct vocalizations for different pods, and execute this brutal, perfectly coordinated warfare when they hunt. They don't just overpower their prey, they completely outsmart it. Looking at these two side by side reveals some absolutely incredible hunting extremes. On one hand, you've got the lone, opportunistic strike of the leopard seal, just waiting silently under the ice, and on the other, the terrifying, coordinated tactics of the orcapod. I mean, orcas will literally swim in tight formations to generate these powerful waves that just wash seals right off the ice. And just to prove how dominant they are, they even hunt great white sharks, executing these precision surgical strikes just to extract the shark's nutrient-rich liver, leaving the rest behind. It is literally strategic warfare at its finest. All right, let's move on to our next section, sky travelers and ice walkers. Moving away from the deep ocean over to the subantarctic islands and coastal cliffs, we see how evolution basically split the birds of this harsh realm into two camps. Take the wandering albatross, 3.5 meters. That is its sheer wingspan, literally wider than a standard car. This staggering evolutionary trait lets these birds glide effortlessly on the fierce howling air currents of the Southern Ocean for tens of thousands of kilometers. They can soar for weeks on a single foraging trip without ever needing to touch the water. They are absolutely the ultimate masters of the sky. But conversely, species like the Gentoo and Adelie penguins just abandon the sky completely to essentially fly underwater. They evolved to trap these microscopic air bubbles in their extremely dense, water-resistant feathers, which dramatically reduces drag. It basically turns their bodies into literal underwater torpedoes that can rocket through the freezing ocean at up to 36 kilometers per hour. Oh, and when they get on land, they just cleverly slide on their bellies across the ice to save precious energy. So we're essentially looking at two completely divergent evolutionary paths to mastering the exact same hostile ecosystem. On one hand, the island-dwelling seabirds, like the albatross, built for boundless flight, using those ferocious winds to their advantage and nesting up on coastal cliffs. And on the other hand, the ice-bound penguins, super dense, insulated, using water pressure to propel themselves, and completely adapted to survive the barren, frozen interior of the continent. But all of this incredible adaptation brings us to a pretty sobering reality. Our source material notes this really powerful thought. If Antarctica is lost, we lose a part of ourselves, and perhaps that day is closer than we think. From the solitary albatross gliding way up above the waves to the starving emperor penguin father enduring a 65-day winter fast, every single creature we've talked about today is locked in an ancient survival cycle. And sadly, that very cycle is now being fundamentally threatened by our rapidly warming world, the early melting of sea ice, and shrinking food sources. So, I want to leave you to think about this question, because taking in this whole survival narrative means realizing that we aren't just passive observers of this magnificent ecosystem anymore. Through global carbon emissions, pollution, and commercial activities, our choices are literally rippling all the way down to the ends of the Earth. We hold Antarctica's fragile frozen future in our hands right now. So, what will that next chapter look like?